So yesterday, MLS released their list of the 25 greatest MLS players of all time in celebration of the 25th anniversary of the league history. And I know when this list was released, there was definitely complaints, and that there was definitely some people feel like there's some bias that gone on this list, and that there was definitely favoritism that happened on this list, and there's definitely notable snubs that should have been on this list, which is why after when I finish doing this video to kind of analyze each of these players that belong onto this list, I of course will make a separate video talk about who I think the 10 players that really got snubbed in terms of being on this list. But that being said, despite the fact that I know, again, there's people complain about this list and some think that it's kind of a little bit weak, I don't think it's that bad as what people said, and that I do think that there might be a couple of players that maybe shouldn't have belonged onto this list, but for majority of the player that's been on the list, they definitely earn it with the way that they are in MLS. And looking at all these great players that have been playing in this league, and it's great the fact that they are getting recognized in terms of this list of the 25 greatest MLS players of all time. So we start off with the first players in Jeff Ogles, who was a defender, and he was considered one of the best defender in the early days of MLS. He was kind of a little bit of a journeyman with him joining a couple teams. I think he joined like 4 MLS teams, but he was definitely considered one of the best defender during the early days. Kyle Beckerman, this one's not a big surprise either. He, believe it or not, is still playing in MLS, and people forgot that he started his career all the way back in 2000 with the Miami Fusion, and that he's also currently the all-time player appearance leader in MLS and have appeared the most game out of anybody in MLS history. David Beckham, I mean, I don't really need to say any more about Beckham, of how he basically is the reason why the league is right now, and all those spendings that has happened, and all those big players that has come to this league, and really just MLS going into a 3.0 era as they are right now. None of that would have happened if David Beckham didn't come to here. And I know there's also going to be some criticism saying that, well, Beckham, he didn't really do much when he comes to the league, and there's been time he's kind of a little bit of a traitor to the Galaxy. Remember when he was repeatedly decided to take loans in Europe instead of playing in MLS. Well, that of course is the case, but again, the impact that he has with this league and really just push this league to the very next level, it's not a big surprise that Beckham is on this list right here. Then you got defender Carlos Bocanegra, and this was probably one of the first one that I was kind of a little bit surprised, and maybe, like, if there's players that I feel like maybe reconsider, he's one of the first player that I want to mention in this video, because, well, Bocanegra was good with the Chicago Fire in the early days, and then of course he eventually ended his career with Chivas USA. I didn't think most impact thing that he did in his career was in MLS, and we're going to see there's a couple of guys that's on there that I do have that same kind of thoughts of them being on this list, and Bocanegra is one of the first one where he did spend his early career with the Chicago Fire, but then he of course moved on to Europe, and really the most impactful and doing majority of his prime, and when he was considered the best defender for the U.S. men's national team, was when he basically was playing in Europe instead of being in MLS. Then we got midfielder Dwayne De Rosio, who is considered probably the best Canadian to ever play in this league, and it's no surprise that he is on this list, and he's also an incredible playmaker, and been in this league for a pretty long time now. I think 14 seasons that he's been in with 3 different teams. Then we got Clint Dempsey in forward, and this is another player that, like what I said about Carlos Bocanegra, I'm going to say the same thing with Clint Dempsey, where this is another player I feel like maybe you shouldn't be on this list, because majority of the time when he was at his best was when he was with Fulham in the Premier League, and that, I know he did eventually come back to the U.S. and play with the Seattle Sounders, and he was definitely very impactful for the Sounders, but, also down the the years, I thought his impactful, and you can clearly see that his age was really showing, and he wasn't scoring as the rate that he was during his prime of his career. But the bottom line is, he's another player where, yes, he of course started in MLS, and people forgot that he actually started with New England before making the jump to Europe, and then eventually come back to pretty much finish his career. Well, if that's the case, then why not add Josie Altidore on on this list too? Like, if Clint Dempsey was on this list of consider the best or consider one of the better goals scored in MLS and one of the best forward to play in this league, then how about add Josie Altidore in there? Because both of them kind of had something similar, where Josie started with his career with the Red Bulls before he made the jump to Europe, and that now he is pretty much finishing his rest of his career with Toronto, or at least hopefully that is going to be the case, knowing the fact that there's still a big question of what's going to happen with Altidore during this offseason. Then you got Landon Donovan next in the 25 greatest MLS player in this one. There's not much discussion. I mean, when you name an MVP award after him, you know that he definitely needs to belong in this list, and he's considered one, if not the greatest MLS player to ever play in this league, and probably the best American to ever play this game, with the way that not only he was incredible during his time with the Quakes and also later on with the Galaxy, but also what he meant to the U.S. men's national team, and that, again, he has got to be considered one, if not the greatest American to ever play the sports. Then we got Marco Echeverri in midfielder. He was considered one of the first superstar in the league when he, of course, came to DC United. And then you got Robin Fraser, who, just like Jeff Augos, one of the best defender in the early days of the league. Then you got Sebastian Giovinco, and this is another player that I am kind of a little bit surprised and maybe feel like they need to reconsider. And, there's no doubt Giovinco was great when he came to TFC back in 2015, and he was a big part of this team really become one of the best team in the league for the past couple of years, winning MLS Cup, going to making multiple MLS Cup appearances, and almost become the first MLS team to ever win the CONCACAF Champions League. However, one thing that I will say about Giovinco is that, during his last year or the last two seasons with TFC, you can clearly see his distribution and his importance for Toronto was lessened, and really in the final year things kind of got a little bit rocky in terms of the relationship between both of them, and that I just feel like, while he had a couple of good seasons with TFC, I can definitely think there's other players that could definitely deserve on this list than Giovinco has, and that, I'm not saying Giovinco, what he has done for TFC wasn't great or whatsoever. I mean, it was great that he was being part of that amazing team for the past couple of seasons, but I just feel like, in terms of looking at the list and how there's a lot of these players that has been consistently being great in MLS, I think Giovinco maybe doesn't really fit that type, with the way that he's only had like 3 or 4 great seasons in MLS before he kind of flamed out and eventually got shifted off to the Middle East. Then you got goalkeeper Kevin Hartman, and this is another one that I was kind of on the borderline of thinking maybe he shouldn't belong onto this list. But then again, when I saw the stats and the way that the longevity of him being in this league and how consistent he is, I mean, Kevin Hartman might not be considered one of the best goalkeeper of all time in MLS, but the consistency that he has and the longevity that he has throughout his career may be the reason why he, of course, was on this list. And I think he also finished second of all time in terms of shutout list by any goalkeeper in this league. So that also kind of is a stat line that helped him to be on this list. And again, I think a lot of these players, well, at least maybe half of these players that I can see here are belong in this list, mainly because not only they are considered one of the best player of MLS all time, but they also have been consistent through a long spell of period. And when you are in MLS and you have a long spell of period of being consistently good, you of course are going to be definitely belong in this list. And the same can say about midfielder Kobe Jones, which Jones, he might not be the most flashy midfielder back in his days, but the consistency of him being very decent with the Galaxy and the longevity of his career in MLS is the reason why he, of course, was on the greatest MLS player list. Then you got Robbie Keane, who, this is another one that I was kind of debated whether or not if he is worthy of being on this list, because it was kind of something similar to Sebastian Giovinco, where Robbie Keane had a couple of decent seasons before he decided to retire. But then I think the difference between Robbie Keane and Giovinco is that Keane definitely have one more to with the Galaxy team, and definitely alongside with Donovan was really a force to be reckoned with going forward for the Galaxy back in the early 2010s and doing that 4-year run where they win 3 MLS Cup. Whereas Giovinco, he only won 1 MLS Cup with TFC, and that, besides the Canadian Championship, there wasn't really much that he, of course, won with this team. Sure, he, of course, bought that team to be a bottom feeder team, to be a team that definitely competes for MLS Cup, but, it's all also about the fact that, you want to not only do well with your team, but you also want to have the trophy to kind of backed up in terms of being on this list. And I think Robbie Keane clearly has that accolade to belong in that list. Then you got defender Chad Marshall, who, again, not really much I have to explain. Like, eventually, at some point, we are going to name the Defender of the Year award to Chad Marshall. And heck, I even multiple times when I talk about Defender or of the Year, and even going back to the MLS's back tournament where I kind of predict who was going to win those awards, I even said it's the Chad Marshall Defender of the Year, because he is considered not only one of the most underrated defender, but probably one of, if not the best defender we have ever seen in this league history. And that also the fact that he has a longevity of being consistently good could also made the case why he belongs to this. And he also have the accolades of the fact that he has won trophy not only with the Seattle Sounders but also with the Columbus Crew. And I definitely heard a lot of people were not happy the fact that when they put Chad Marshall on this list, they showed him in a Sounders jersey, which I know recently we know more of Chad Marshall being a great defender for the Sounders, but don't forget, when he started his career in MLS, he was with the Columbus Crew, and he was equally a great player with the Crew than he is with the Seattle Sounders, and also winning almost around the same amount of trophy when he was with the Columbus Crew compared to his time with the Seattle Sounders. Then we get to the next player, which is Joseph Martinez, and there is no doubt that of all these players that, again, there are some players that I feel like they deserve to be on this list, and there are some players that I feel like maybe they are not there to belong in that list. But if there is one player that I feel like he probably shouldn't be on this list, and certainly the one that I hope MLS could potentially reconsider, is Joseph Martinez. And this is nothing to this him, the fact that he's been a great player in MLS and he's been a huge influence of why Atlanta has been very well. But he's only been in the league for four seasons, and technically he only had 2 great seasons with Atlanta, with his first season being an injury-riddled kind of season. Before in the second season, that's when he of course broke at that time the most goal ever scored in MLS history, and then the very next year he would score another 27 goals. But that was really it. I mean, this season, besides the first game he played against Nashville, he basically was sidelined with a torn ACL, and that really, what I'm trying to say is that he's only been in the league for such a short amount of period, where I think maybe if he can continue to do this throughout maybe 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 seasons, then yeah, no doubt that I think he's going to belong in the list. But if that is kind of the number that made him to belong in the list, you might as well just put Carlos Vela or even Zlatan onto the list too, because they also have some equally good number of being in this league for a very short time, and yet they're not on this list, and Joseph Martinez is on this one. So yeah, I do feel like this, I know Joseph Martinez down the line, if we're ever going to do another list of looking at who are the greatest MLS player, if he can continue to be consistent to what he has done for Atlanta for the past couple of seasons, then yeah, he's going to be on this list. But I just feel like it's just way too early to say, especially the fact that again he's only been in the league for 4 years, and technically he only played free season or even 2.5 season, because again his first season he was very injury riddled, and that the only 2 full season that he played, yes, he did very well, but we shall see whether or not if he can continue heading into the future. Then you got goalkeeper Tony Meola, who is considered one, if not the greatest goalkeeper during the early times of MLS, alongside with Jaime Moreno, who, you know, if you're gonna put Marco Echeverri in the greatest MLS player list, you obviously got to put Jaime Moreno in there too, because both of those players are really the first time we see there is a very good dynamic duo in the attacking front. And I think with Echeverri and Moreno, you know, they were definitely two of the most scariest dynamic duo during the early time. And even if they were still playing to this day, I think they could definitely still cause some issue in terms of defense, because of how good they were just ripping apart leagues defend the many teams defending for the first couple of years of this league existence. Then, speaking of defenders and talk about great defenders in the early age, you also got Eddie Pope, who not only considered was one of the best defender in MLS during the early days alongside with Robin Fraser, but probably one of the best defender in the U.S. men's national team, and how big he meant in terms of the defensive court for the U.S. Then in the midfield, you got Preki, who is considered pretty much back in the early days of a type of Nicolas Ladero and also Diego Valeri type of player. And in some way, you know, if we didn't have Preki, maybe we wouldn't have the likes of Ladero and Valeri kind of player doing kind of similar things to what Preki did during his early days. And the same can goes with Steve Ralston, who I think Steve Ralston is probably one of those players, kind of forgotten player on that number 10 row, of considered one of the best attacking midfielder in league history with the numbers that he has. And I think the reason why maybe people forgot about it is because, you know, I think some people might even argue the fact that maybe he shouldn't belong on this list because he doesn't have to have the awards that is backed up. But I think maybe he of course would belong on this list mainly because of the fact that he has the individual accolade to do it, and that I think the only reason why he's been forgotten is because he hasn't won a lot of trophy, if any trophy, during his time with New England, despite the fact that they've been in MLS Cup pretty much almost every single year, and unfortunately come to the losing side. Then moving on into the next player, you got goalkeeper Nick Rimando. Not a big surprise. I mean, again, in the future, if the goalkeeper of the year is going to be renamed, it's got to be the Nick Rimando goalkeeper of the year. I mean, all-time leader in terms of appearance as a goalkeeper in MLS, and the fact that, you know, I'm kind of surprised how Nick Rimando never really kind of get into the U.S. men's national team, despite the fact that he has been considered one of the best goalkeeper of all time, and just the longevity of him being so good to this RSL team for a very long time is kind of a little bit surprising. Why the U.S. men's national team never even thought about trying to give him some appearance with their team, and even if that is the case, again, he is considered probably one, if not the greatest goalkeeper, and also one of the most consistently good goalkeeper for a very long time. Then you got midfielder Carlos Valderrama, who I'm going to kind of say the same reasons about him as with Marco Echeverri. One of the first big superstar name that comes into this league, and although he didn't really do as much as people thought that Marco Echeverri would have done when he came into this league, he is still a very big name kind of player, and definitely one that deserved to be on this list. Then you got midfielder Diego Valeri, who again, he's pretty much the modern version of Preki, and that I also was a little bit surprised that Nico Ladero was not on this list too, because if Valeri is on this list and he's kind of like the modern version of Preki, isn't that the same case with Ladero? I mean, he's also another type of another modern version of Preki, so he probably should have been on this list too. Well, that being said, I think I've just kind of gave my reason of my next video, where, you know, if I'm going to kind of give you a little bit spoiler of one of those players that I think got big time snub on this list, has to be Ladero, with the way that if Valeri makes it to this list of being one of the best number 10 in the league, then surely Ladero should have been on this list too. And I know Valeri have played more, he have been playing in MLS longer than what Ladero has, but their numbers are kind of like, if you want to do ratio, their numbers are pretty much right on balance with each other. So I think Ladero equally should have been on this list if Valeri made it this list either. Then the last two players, you got two forwards that is considered two of the greatest goal scored of all time in MLS, starting with the greatest goal scorer of all time, that is Chris Wondolowski. And you know, I know from what I've recently heard, it looks like it's pretty much 99% that he's going to be coming back next season, which I am very happy to see him coming back next season. And most likely, well, I wouldn't say most likely, but he is going to be back with the Quakes, and that he will of course have his farewell season tour heading into next season. But yeah, I mean, there's not much I have to say about Wando of why I think he is considered one of the best player ever, and no doubt the greatest Quakes player to ever play with this team, with all those goals that he have scored with this team, and how countlessly he of course have carried us on his back with the amount of goal scoring that he has done with this team. And then lastly, we got Bradley Wright Phillips, who again, you know, he is one of the best goal scored of all time, the fastest player to ever reach 100 goals in league history. Definitely recognizable to be and definitely deserve to be on this list of the 25 greatest MLS player. But yeah, there we have it. That is pretty much the list of these 25 greatest MLS players. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of this list? And I know, again, there is going to people that's going to complain about this list, because there's definitely some favoritism that is going on. But that is why, after when I finish this video, I of course will start talking about some of the snubs and some of the players that I think could have easily been on this list too. But let me know in the comments below, who do you think should have been on this list, and also who do you think you might reconsider on this list, or you might reconsider them probably are not there to belong into the list of the 25 greatest MLS player of all time. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.